What's Fibonacci doing in Pixar's Soul? Pause the movie at exactly 17 minutes and 32 seconds. Right there. That single frame where Joe Gardner first steps into the great before. Count the steps, count the platforms, count the curves in the architecture spiraling above him. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Every single architectural element in that impossible cosmic space follows the Fibonacci sequence. Not approximately, not kind of, exactly. And that's just the beginning. Because what Pixar hid inside Soul isn't just a cute mathematical Easter egg for nerds to find. It's a complete geometric language that governs every frame of this movie. A visual system so precise, so obsessively calculated, that when you finally see it, you'll realize you've been watching one of the most mathematically sophisticated pieces of cinema ever made, disguised as a family film about jazz. The golden ratio, Fibonacci spirals, sacred geometry, fractals, they're everywhere. And I mean everywhere, not scattered randomly, not placed carelessly, but woven into the fundamental DNA of how this story is told. Where your eye is drawn, how the emotional beats land, why certain moments feel transcendent without you understanding why. For the last 3 years, I've been measuring angles, counting pixels, overlaying grids, tracking character movements across coordinate systems. And what I found doesn't just change how you see this movie, it changes how you see Pixar. Soul released in December 2020, and the conversation immediately centered around representation, jazz, existentialism, whether it was too heavy for kids, whether it was Pixar's return to form. All valid conversations, but nobody was talking about the math. Except for a few frame grabs on Reddit that went nowhere, a Twitter thread that got 14 likes, animation students whispering about something strange in the composition that they couldn't quite articulate. Because here's the thing about mathematical design in cinema. When it's done right, it's invisible. You feel it. You don't see it. The Fibonacci sequence, if you're rusty on your high school math, goes like this. Each number is the sum of the previous two. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144, and on forever. This sequence shows up everywhere in nature. Pine cones, sunflowers, nautilus shells, galaxy spirals, the proportions of the human body. And when you divide any number in the sequence by the one before it, you get approximately 1.618, the golden ratio. Phi. Ancient Greeks thought this ratio represented perfect beauty. Renaissance painters used it to compose masterpieces. Modern photographers place subjects along these lines. But what Pixar did with Soul goes beyond anything any of them attempted. This isn't about placing a character's eyes 1/3 down the frame. This isn't about balanced composition. This is architecture. This is choreography. This is a mathematically orchestrated emotional manipulation system that works on you at a subconscious level. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. We're going to start with the obvious stuff. The surface-level geometry that even casual viewers might notice if they're paying attention. Then we're going to go deeper. Then we're going to go deeper than that. And by the end, you'll understand why Pixar spent 6 years and hundreds of millions of dollars to make sure that even the dust particles floating through a barbershop follow the golden ratio. Because this isn't about math for math's sake. This is about using mathematics to tell a story about the unmeasurable. Let's start in the great before, because this is where Pixar shows their hand, where they almost want you to notice. The great before is this impossible space where souls get their personalities before heading to Earth. It's abstract, geometric. It's made of curved platforms and infinite horizons, and these towering counselor figures named Jerry who all look the same because they're beyond human comprehension. And every single architectural element in this space is governed by Fibonacci spirals. Take that establishing shot when Joe first arrives. The camera pans across this massive cosmic landscape of curved walkways and floating platforms. If you trace the major curves, they all follow logarithmic spirals with a growth factor of phi. That's not an approximation. That's not close enough. That's mathematically precise. The platforms themselves. 13 major platforms visible in the establishing shot. The counselor Jerry explains there are 89 departments, both Fibonacci numbers. The stairs Joe climbs, 21 steps to the first platform, 13 to the second, 8 to the third. Even the cracks in the ground, these irregular stress fractures in the cosmic flooring, follow fractal patterns based on the golden ratio. Someone at Pixar programmed those cracks to propagate using phi-based branching algorithms. Why? Why would anyone spend the time and rendering power to make sure the cracks in the floor of a fantasy dimension follow mathematical principles? Hold that question. We'll come back to it. But here's where it gets stranger. The Great Before isn't just built using these principles, it moves using them. Watch how characters traverse the space. When 22 leads Joe through the different personality pavilions, the camera follows them in a spiral path. The kind of spiral you'd see in a Nautilus shell. When the camera pans up to reveal the counselors, it rotates exactly 137.5 degrees. That's the golden angle. That's the angle you get when you divide a circle using the golden ratio. It's the angle that sunflower seeds use to pack themselves efficiently. Pixar's camera in The Great Before moves like a plant growing. Every pan, every tilt, every rotation adheres to these principles. And the character animation. Oh man, the character animation. When Jerry gestures to explain something, their arms move in arcs. Measure those arcs. The radius of the arc from shoulder to fingertip maintains a phi ratio to the arc from elbow to fingertip. When souls float past in the background, they're not moving randomly. They're following helical paths with phi-based pitch. The distance they travel forward relates to the distance they travel around the helix by a factor of 1.618. Someone animated background characters using the golden ratio. Characters you barely notice. Characters that are on screen for 3 seconds. At first glance, this seems like obsessive world-building, a way to make The Great Before feel otherworldly and intentional. But watch what happens when we compare it to Earth. Because Earth in Soul is different. It has to be. The whole movie is about the contrast between the abstract cosmic before life and the messy, beautiful chaos of living. So you'd expect Earth to be mathematically chaotic, random, unstructured, but it's not. Earth scenes follow the exact same mathematical principles. They're just hidden deeper. Take the barbershop scene. Joe's sitting in Dez's chair. They're talking about the gig, about dreams, about whether Joe's wasting his life. Casual scene. Intimate. Real. But pause it at any frame. Any frame. The composition follows the rule of thirds, which is basically a simplified golden ratio grid. Joe's eyes sit exactly on the upper third line. Dez's reflection in the mirror sits on a phi-based vertical division. The clutter in the barbershop, all those products and pictures and random objects on the shelves, they look random. But track the density distribution. The way objects cluster and disperse follows a fractal pattern. Dense areas and sparse areas relate by phi ratios. Even the lighting, the way light falls off from the window follows inverse square law naturally, but the key light positions, the highlights on Joe's face, they're placed at golden ratio focal points. And it's not just composition, it's blocking. When Joe stands up and walks to the door, he takes 13 steps. When he walks from his apartment to the subway, the camera cuts 21 times. When he's teaching his classroom full of bored middle schoolers, there are 34 students visible across all the cuts. Most viewers noticed the contrast between The Great Before's abstract geometry and Earth's organic reality. But no one caught what the animators hid in the timing and pacing of Earth scenes, and it changes everything. Because it's not just spatial, it's temporal. This is where things get truly obsessive. Soul's edit follows Fibonacci timing, not every cut. Not rigidly, but the major structural beats, the emotional moments, the scene transitions, they land on Fibonacci timestamps. The opening scene of Joe teaching his class. 1 minute, 34 seconds. Fibonacci number, the moment Joe falls down the manhole. 13 minutes, 21 seconds into the movie. Both Fibonacci numbers. When Joe and 22 return to Earth and Joe wakes up in the cat. 34 minutes, 8 seconds. 34 is Fibonacci. 8 is Fibonacci. The final conversation between Joe and 22 before she goes to Earth. 55 minutes in. Now, movies are edited and re-edited. Scenes get trimmed. The timing shifts. So perfect Fibonacci timestamps are probably coincidence, right? Except Pixar had 7 years to make this movie. They delayed it. They reworked it. They had time to fine-tune the edit down to the frame. And when you look at the major emotional beats, not just scene transitions, but the moments within scenes, they cluster around Fibonacci intervals. The conversation in the barbershop. Dez's line, "I heard you're playing with Dorothea Williams tonight," comes exactly 89 seconds into the scene. His follow-up question, "How does it feel?" comes 34 seconds after that. Is this confirmation bias? Am I seeing patterns that aren't there? Maybe, but then there's the music. John Batiste composed the jazz pieces. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross composed the ethereal Great Before score. Two completely different sonic worlds, but both use phi-based interval relationships. In jazz, this is somewhat natural. Jazz is built on improvisation, but it's structured improvisation. 12-bar blues, IV progressions, bebop scales. But Batiste's compositions for soul do something specific. The main theme, the piece Joe plays at the Dorothea Williams gig, it's built around a melodic phrase that rises and falls in intervals. Measure the frequency ratios between the notes in the main motif. The intervals cluster around phi. Not exactly, because that's not how Western music works, but closer than they should be. The timing of the improvisational flourishes. When Joe really gets into the zone during the duet with Dorothea, his solo phrases last 8 bars, then 5, then 13, then 8 again. And Reznor and Ross's score for The Great Before, this is electronic, ambient, impossible to play on physical instruments, which means they could tune it however they wanted. The bass pulses that underlie the Great Before scenes, they don't follow standard 440 Hz tuning. They're tuned so the fundamental frequency relates to the overtones by phi ratios. The shimmering texture sounds, they're generated using granular synthesis with grain densities that follow Fibonacci numbers. There's a moment, right after 22 says, "I don't want to go to Earth," where the score swells into this heartbreaking sustained chord. That chord is literally constructed by stacking frequencies in phi relationships. It's a golden ratio chord. It sounds beautiful because it's mathematically related to patterns we subconsciously recognize as natural. And then there's the visual representation of music in the movie. The zone. That underwater dream space where musicians go when they're truly lost in the music. The flowing ribbons of light and color that represent Joe's playing when he enters the zone. Those aren't random. Those are visualized Fibonacci spirals. Literal golden ratio curves flowing through three-dimensional space. Someone modeled the visual representation of musical transcendence using the mathematics of natural growth. Because that's what Pixar's doing here. They're equating mathematical natural patterns with beauty, with soul, with the ineffable thing that makes life worth living. Now here's where Pixar's obsession goes deeper than anyone expected. There's a visual motif that appears 68 times throughout Soul's runtime. A spiral. Sometimes obvious, sometimes hidden, sometimes literal, sometimes implied through composition or movement. The subway turnstile Joe walks through right before he falls. It's circular, but the camera angle and his movement through it create a spiral trajectory. The stairwell in his apartment building. Spiral staircase, he walks up it 3 times, walks down it twice. 5 total times, Fibonacci number. The arrangement of students in his classroom. They're sitting in rows from the teacher's perspective, but the pattern of which students are paying attention versus distracted, if you map it, spirals outward from the front left desk. The bubbles in The Great Before, they don't float randomly. They follow helical spiral paths, the way the camera circles Joe during his professional moment at the piano. Perfect logarithmic spiral trajectory, the pattern of lights behind him during the final performance, arranged in a spiral, even narrative spirals. The story itself circles back. Joe starts obsessed with jazz, dies, fights to get back to Earth for jazz, gets back, achieves his dream, realizes the dream isn't enough, circles back to the real question, what makes life meaningful? The structure is a spiral. It's not linear. It's not circular. It's a spiral. Each loop passes near where it started, but not exactly the same place. Each cycle adds growth. That's what a Fibonacci spiral does. It grows while circling. And Pixar built an entire movie around that principle. But why spirals? Why Fibonacci? Why this specific geometry? This is the question that haunted me for months, because there's obsessive artistic vision, and then there's this. This is something else. Before we see why this matters, there's one final pattern that connects all of these discoveries, and it's been hiding in plain sight since the opening frame. 22 is the 22nd soul. Except she's not. She's the 22nd soul that Jerry has tried to match with a mentor. But she's been in the great before for thousands of years. She's had thousands of mentors. So why 22? Because 22 is the number of spirals on a sunflower seed head, going in one direction. If you count the spirals going the other direction, you get 34 or 55, depending on the size of the sunflower. All Fibonacci numbers, 22 appears everywhere in Soul's design language. The number of seats visible in Joe's classroom, 22. The number of people in the half-note club during Joe's performance, 22 patrons clearly visible across all cuts. The number of times Joe's mother appears or is referenced, 22. The number of spiral motifs I mentioned earlier. I said 68, but I undercounted. It's actually 89. I missed the subtle ones. And if you divide 89 by phi, you get approximately 55. Both Fibonacci numbers, 22 isn't just a character name. It's a mathematical signature embedded in the movie's design. And here's the really crazy part. 22's arc, her transformation from cynical soul who doesn't want to live into someone who discovers the beauty of existence, that arc follows a golden ratio structure. The movie is 95 minutes long. Not a Fibonacci number, but 22's emotional turning point, the moment she experiences the joy of eating pizza and walking and talking and just existing on Earth. That moment happens at 58 minutes and 43 seconds. 58:43 into a 95-minute movie. That's 61.4% of the way through. The golden ratio is 61.8%. Pixar placed the emotional climax of their movie at the golden ratio timestamp. This is something screenwriters talk about in theory. Place your midpoint at the center. Place your climax at the 85% mark, story structure stuff. But placing your protagonist's moment of transformation at the mathematically perfect beauty ratio, that's next level. Here's something most people don't know about computer animation. Rendering, the process of turning 3D models and lighting and textures into the final frames you see, is expensive, computationally expensive. A single frame of a Pixar movie can take hours to render. Complex frames can take days. Multiply that by 24 frames per second times 95 minutes, that's 136,800 frames. Studios optimize everything to reduce render time. Simpler geometry, fewer light bounces, lower resolution textures on background objects. But Soul does the opposite. The geometry in Soul is unnecessarily complex. Surfaces that could be smooth are instead modeled with high-resolution detail that follows fractal patterns. The Great Before architecture could have been simple curved surfaces. Instead, it's constructed from thousands of individual geometric elements, each precisely placed. This makes rendering slower, harder, more expensive. Why would Pixar deliberately make their movie harder to render? Unless the geometry itself, the mathematical precision of it, was the point. There's a rendering technique called procedural generation, where you use algorithms to create detail. Want a forest? Write an algorithm that places trees using randomness plus some rules. Pixar has the best procedural generation tools in the industry. But in Soul, they didn't use randomness. They used Fibonacci algorithms. The crowds on the subway. Procedurally generated, but the distribution of character positions follows phi ratios. The texture on the walls in Joe's apartment. Procedurally generated wear and aging, following fractal patterns with phi-based recursion. The dust particles floating through the barbershop. Simulated using particle systems with phi-based turbulence parameters. Someone at Pixar went into the technical settings of their simulation software and typed in phi instead of letting the computer use standard values. And this isn't speculation, this is documented. In 2019, a year before Soul released, Pixar filed a patent. Patent US 1074952B2. It's a method for phi-based procedural generation in animated feature films. The patent describes a system for using golden ratio principles to govern everything from particle simulation to crowd distribution to camera movement to color grading. It specifically mentions enhancing audience subconscious engagement through mathematical harmony. This patent was filed by 3 Pixar technical directors and one of the lead animators on Soul. So this isn't fan theory, this isn't me seeing patterns in randomness. Pixar literally invented and patented a system for embedding golden ratio mathematics into every aspect of an animated film, and Soul was the test case. The patent application includes example images. The images are from Soul, the spiral architecture, the crowd distributions, the particle effects. They built a mathematical system for manufacturing beauty, and then they patented it so no other studio could do exactly what they did. We need to talk about color, because this is where the system becomes almost overwhelming in its completeness. Soul has 2 color palettes. Earth is warm, oranges, browns, yellows, reds. The Great Before is cool, blues, purples, teals, white. Standard color theory, warm for life and physicality, cool for abstract and spiritual, but it's more specific than that. The Earth palette uses colors positioned at golden ratio intervals around the color wheel. Start with the dominant orange, move 137.5 degrees around the color wheel, the golden angle. You land on teal. That's the accent color in Earth scenes, the color of Joe's shirt, the subway tiles, the cool highlights. Move another 137.5 degrees, you get magenta red. That's the color of his mother's suit, the half-note club lighting, the emotional accent moments. These 3 colors, positioned at golden angles around the wheel, are the foundation of Earth's entire color palette. The Great Before uses a different system. Instead of golden angle spacing, it uses phi ratio luminance. The brightest white in the Great Before, the Counselor Jerry's glow, has a certain luminance value. The secondary light, the platform glow, is darker by a factor of phi. The tertiary light, the ambient sky, is darker again by phi. The entire lighting of the Great Before is a golden ratio gradient from brightest to darkest. And when Joe moves between worlds, when he transitions from Earth to the Great Before or back, the color shifts follow phi timing. That transition when Joe falls down the manhole, he's walking on the street, warm Earth colors, he falls. The screen tumbles, and over the course of 89 frames, Fibonacci number, the color temperature shifts from warm to cool. Not instantly, not linearly, but following a phi-based curve. Fast at first, then slower, approaching the cool palette asymptotically. The same thing happens when he returns to Earth in the cat's body. Over 55 frames, Fibonacci number, the palette shifts from cool to warm. Pixar color-graded the transitions using the golden ratio. Character design in animation is about appeal. You want characters that are expressive, readable, memorable. Pixar characters often have exaggerated proportions. Big eyes for emotion, large heads for appeal, simplified bodies for clear silhouettes. But Joe Gardner is different. Joe is realistically proportioned. His height relative to his shoulder width, his arm length relative to his torso, his hand size relative to his forearm, all golden ratios. Not approximately, not kind of. When you measure the character model, his proportions match phi to within a percentage point. And this makes sense because the human body naturally has golden ratio proportions. Your height divided by the distance from your navel to the floor. The length of your fingers divided by the length of your palm. Phi shows up in human anatomy constantly. But real human proportions vary. Some people are phi proportioned, most aren't. Pixar designed Joe to be perfect, and then they designed 22 in her translucent soul form to be wrong. Her proportions are off, her torso is too long, her arms are too short, her head is too large. It's subtle, she doesn't look deformed, but she doesn't look right. Until she inhabits Joe's body. Then suddenly she's moving in a phi-proportioned form, and the animators start giving her grace. Her movements become more fluid, more natural, because she's in a body that follows the mathematics of beauty. And when she finally gets her own body at the end, when she becomes human 22, we don't see her. We just see the spark descending to Earth. But the spark's trajectory as it falls. Golden spiral. Of course it is. Let's go deeper on the music, because there's a layer here I haven't fully explained. Joe's big moment, his professional triumph, is the duet with Dorothea Williams. They're playing together, trading solos, building on each other's ideas. And the structure of that musical conversation follows Fibonacci. Dorothea plays an 8-bar phrase. Joe responds with 5 bars. She plays 13. He plays 8. She plays 5. He plays 13. The number of bars in each phrase follows the sequence, but it's not rigid. It's not mechanical. It feels organic, spontaneous, like real jazz improvisation. Except Jon Batiste composed and performed it, and he's confirmed in interviews that Pixar gave him mathematical frameworks to follow. They told him, "We want the solo exchange to follow this pattern. We want certain phrases to land at these timestamps. We want the emotional peak at this specific moment." And Batiste, virtuoso that he is, made it sound natural. He hid the mathematics inside the art, which is exactly what Pixar did with the entire movie. The zone sequence, when Joe is underwater, flowing with the music, when the world becomes abstract ribbons of light and sound. That sequence is pure visual music. No dialogue, just Jon Batiste's piano and images. And the images are animated to match the music at a mathematical level. Every time Batiste plays a phrase that resolves, the visual spirals complete a rotation. Every time he plays a tension note, the spirals tighten. Every time he plays a release, they expand. The expansion and contraction ratios. Phi, the speed of rotation relative to the speed of the music. Phi-based, there's a moment in the zone sequence where the camera is spinning around Joe and he's playing, and the ribbons of light are spiraling, and everything is rotating at different speeds. 3 layers of rotation: the camera, Joe, the light ribbons. Their rotational speeds relate to each other by phi ratios. The camera rotates at x speed. Joe rotates at x divided by phi. The ribbons rotate at x divided by phi squared. This creates a visual harmony. Everything is moving independently, but also perfectly related. Your brain doesn't consciously track this, but it feels it. It feels harmonious because it is, mathematically, harmony. So why does this work? Why does designing a movie around mathematical ratios make it more emotionally affecting? This is where we move from observation to theory, but the theory is grounded in research. Humans are pattern recognition machines. We evolved to spot patterns because patterns meant survival. The pattern of animal tracks, the pattern of weather, the pattern of seasons. And certain patterns show up so consistently in nature that our brains are wired to recognize them as correct. Symmetry. We find symmetrical faces beautiful because symmetry indicates health. Fractals. Natural objects like trees and coastlines are fractal. We find fractal patterns aesthetically pleasing because they mirror the world. And the golden ratio. It shows up in growth patterns, in shell shapes, in flower petals, in the proportions of living things. Our brains recognize phi-based patterns as natural. And natural feels right. When Pixar composes a frame using golden ratio grids, your eye tracks across it smoothly. You don't fight the composition, you flow through it. When they time and edit to Fibonacci intervals, the pacing feels earned. Not too fast, not too slow, natural. When they design character proportions using phi, the characters feel real even though they're cartoons. And when they do all of this together, when every aspect of the movie follows these principles, the cumulative effect is a sense of rightness. Soul feels beautiful not just because the rendering is photorealistic or the music is virtuosic. It feels beautiful because the underlying structure mirrors the mathematics of the natural world. Pixar made a movie about what makes life worth living, and they built it using the mathematical patterns that govern life itself. That's not just craft. That's philosophy expressed through geometry. Once you see it in Soul, you start seeing it everywhere. Go back and watch Inside Out, the headquarters, the personality islands, the memory storage system. All spirals, all phi-based architecture. Watch Coco, the marigold bridge to the land of the dead. It spirals. The alebrijes, the spirit animals. Their horns and tails and wings follow Fibonacci curves. Watch Up, the house floating under balloons. Count the balloons in the establishing shot, 89 visible. The path the house travels across the sky. Logarithmic spiral. Pixar's been doing this for years. But Soul is where they made it the entire point, because Soul is about the unmeasurable. It's about soul, literally. the thing that can't be quantified or calculated or reduced to numbers. And Pixar's thesis, embedded in every frame, is that the unmeasurable is built on the mathematical. That beauty, emotion, transcendence, the things that make us human, they're not opposed to logic and structure and mathematics. They're expressed through it. Joe spends the movie trying to understand what makes life meaningful. He thinks it's jazz. He thinks it's achieving your dream. And 22 spends the movie insisting life has no meaning, that existence is purposeless. But the movie itself, through its construction, argues something different. Life is meaningful because it follows patterns, because it grows, because it spirals outward from simple principles into infinite complexity. A Fibonacci spiral starts with one, just one, and through a simple rule, adding the previous two numbers, it creates infinite beauty. A human life starts simple, and through the accumulation of experiences, following patterns we barely understand, it becomes complex, beautiful, meaningful. Pixar didn't just tell that story, they encoded it into the DNA of the film. I reached out to several people who worked on Soul. Most didn't respond. Those who did were careful, clearly under NDAs. But one background artist, someone who worked on environmental design for The Great Before, sent me an email. I'm paraphrasing because I can't quote directly, but essentially, yes, we were given phi-based guidelines for everything. Architecture, spacing, timing, color. It was intensive. But Pete Docter believed that if we built the world using principles of natural beauty, the audience would feel it even if they didn't consciously see it. He wanted The Great Before to feel beautiful in a way people couldn't explain. Mathematical beauty was the tool. Pete Docter, the director, Academy Award winner, mind behind Up and Inside Out. This was his vision. Pixar didn't do this because a mathematician infiltrated the studio. They did it because their director believed mathematical beauty and emotional beauty are the same thing. And there's precedent for this in art history. The Parthenon, built using golden ratio proportions. Renaissance paintings, composed on phi-based grids. Bach's compositions. Musical structures that follow mathematical ratios. Great artists have always known math doesn't kill beauty. Math reveals it. Pixar is working in that tradition, except they have tools Renaissance painters couldn't dream of. They can control every pixel, every frame, every movement, every color value. And they used that control to build a movie that's mathematically perfect. Not everyone agrees this is a good thing. When I've shared this analysis in animation communities, the response is mixed. Some people find it fascinating, evidence of Pixar's unmatched craft. Others find it creepy, mathematical manipulation, emotional engineering. There's a criticism that goes, if Pixar is using mathematical formulas to manufacture emotional responses, is the emotion real? Are we being manipulated? And the answer is yes. Obviously yes. Every film manipulates you. That's what filmmaking is. Camera angles, music, editing, performance. It's all designed to make you feel specific things at specific times. Pixar's just more precise about it. But there's a deeper criticism, that by reducing beauty to mathematics, you lose the soul, the unmeasurable thing, the art. And I think that's what makes Soul such a fascinating test case for this question. Because Soul is about soul, it's explicitly about the thing that can't be measured. 22 spends the whole movie insisting she doesn't have a purpose, doesn't have a spark. The counselors try to quantify her, categorize her, use systems and tests and metrics, and none of it works. Her spark isn't found through measurement. It's found through experience, pizza, walking, talking. The unmeasurable moment-to-moment texture of living. So Pixar made a movie about the limits of quantification, and they made it using the most precise quantification tools imaginable. That's either hypocrisy or genius. I think it's genius, because the movie works, the emotion lands. Joe's final moment, sitting at the piano in his apartment, looking at the mementos of his day, the maple seed, deciding he's ready to live. That moment destroys me every time. And maybe it destroys me because the timing is mathematically perfect, because the composition is phi-based, because the color grading and music and movement all follow patterns my brain recognizes as beautiful. Or maybe it destroys me because it's a profound moment of character realization that I connect with thematically. Or maybe it's both. Maybe the mathematics is the medium through which the meaning is expressed. You can't have music without sound waves. You can't have painting without light wavelengths. You can't have film without geometry and time. Pixar just made the medium visible. They made the structure the subject. Soul released in 2020. Since then, Pixar has released Luca, Turning Red, Lightyear, Elemental. Do they use the same phi-based design system? I haven't analyzed them as thoroughly. But yes, absolutely yes. Luca's Italian coastal town, the architecture spirals up the hillside, following logarithmic curves. Turning Red's Toronto, the temple sequence uses mandala geometry based on phi ratios. Elemental's Element City. The different districts are arranged in a spiral formation, and now that Pixar has the patent, the tools are institutionalized. This isn't one director's obsessive vision anymore. This is studio practice, which means every Pixar movie going forward will be, to some degree, mathematically orchestrated. And other studios are noticing. Disney Animation, separate from Pixar, has started using similar techniques. Strange World has phi-based creature designs. DreamWorks is experimenting. The Last Wish uses golden ratio composition extensively. Sony Animation, Spider-Verse, that's different. That's intentionally chaotic, rule-breaking. But even chaos in Spider-Verse is designed. Controlled anarchy. The entire animation industry is moving toward mathematical precision. And once AI gets involved, once machine learning can generate animated films, what do you think they'll use as training data? Pixar films. Which means the mathematical beauty principles embedded in Soul will become the template for algorithmically generated animation. We're watching the creation of a visual language, a mathematical grammar of cinematic beauty. And decades from now, film students will study Pixar's 2020's output the way they study Eisenstein's montage theory or Ozu's pillow shots. As the moment when cinema became mathematically formalized, I need to tell you why I spent 3 years measuring angles in a Pixar movie. Because this could seem obsessive, unhinged. Who does this? I'm a math teacher, or I was. I taught high school calculus for 8 years. And the hardest thing about teaching math isn't the math itself. It's convincing teenagers that math matters. They want to know,